Frenchman Flat, Nevada, May 25, 1953, 8:30 in the morning Pacific Time. The sun's already mean, the sage is already tired, and the desert smells like dust waiting to be kicked up. About 6 miles down the basin, a 280mm cannon is parked on its mount, painted in olive drab, weighing 83 tons. Its barrel is angled at a stretch of empty playa, with nothing in it but creosote bushes and 10,000 years of patience. Soldiers crouch in trenches with their backs to the gun. And then, somebody pulls the lanyard. Now, to understand how a cannon ended up shooting an atomic bomb on a Monday morning in Nevada, you've got to rewind about 4 years. In 1949, the Soviets tested their first nuclear device. The U.S. Army, which had spent the late 40s feeling pretty special about its monopoly on apocalyptic weaponry, suddenly discovered it was no longer the only kid on the block with a slingshot. The Pentagon's response was, and I want to be fair here, exactly the response you'd expect from a Pentagon. Make more bombs, bigger bombs, smaller bombs, bombs you could fire out of a tank, bombs you could carry on your back, bombs you could, theoretically, lob across the Fulda Gap like a really mean horseshoe. That last category landed on the desk of a designer named Robert Schwartz, working at the Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey. His assignment was simple: design an artillery piece capable of firing a nuclear shell. By 1949, he had drafts. By 1950, the Army had a prototype. By 1952, they were building 20 of them. The thing that came out of Schwartz's drafting board is officially called the M65 atomic cannon. 280 millimeters across the bore, that's about 11 inches, and 83 tons fully kitted. To move it, you needed 2 custom prime movers, one fore, one aft, hauling it like a parade float that had taken a wrong turn somewhere outside Lubbock and refused to admit it. 20 M65s roll off the line between 1952 and 1953. Each one came with a crew, a manual thicker than a county phone book, and the kind of price tag that makes a budget hearing go very quiet very fast. The plan was to deploy them where the Cold War felt most likely to get warm. That meant West Germany, parked along the Fulda Gap, the broad, low corridor between East and West where every American general assumed the Soviet armored divisions would come pouring through if anyone ever decided to start World War III. A few were sent to South Korea, where the armistice was new and nervous. Most stayed in West Germany, rolling out for parades and exercises, doing wonders for the morale of any GI who wanted to feel like he was driving the loudest, heaviest item in NATO. The crews got to know the gun, they serviced it, they hauled it, they fired conventional rounds out of it during training, and somewhere in those long European afternoons, nobody is exactly sure who said it first, the M65 picked up a nickname. They called her Atomic Annie. The Army never officially endorsed the name. The Army never has to. Soldiers will name a thing whether you like it or not, and once a piece of equipment has a girl's name, it tends to keep it through 3 administrations and a museum acquisition. Now, if you've never stood next to an 83-ton gun, let me try to give you a sense of scale. The barrel alone is about 40 feet of solid steel. The breech sits about chest-high on a 6-foot man. To traverse the gun left or right, you crank a hydraulic system that sounds, by all accounts, like a tractor giving up. To elevate the barrel, same story. To move the whole thing more than a few feet, you bring back the prime movers, the trucks, the spotters, and a real good map of every low bridge between you and where you'd rather be. But the question hung over the whole program like Nevada heat over a windshield. Did the thing actually work? You can build a cannon, you can build a nuclear shell, you can put 20 of them in Germany. None of that proves the cannon can fire the shell, and the shell can detonate, and the crew firing it doesn't end up regretting their career choices in real time. So, the Army scheduled a live test. It was folded into a series called Upshot Knothole, a string of 11 nuclear shots conducted at the Nevada test site in the spring of 1953. Most of them were tower shots or airdrops, the standard ways the U.S. was learning what its bombs could do. But the 10th shot, codenamed Grable, was different. Grable was the artillery one. A single M65 was hauled out to Frenchman Flat. It was loaded with one W9 nuclear shell, weighing roughly 600 pounds. The yield was estimated at 15 kilotons, about the same as the bomb dropped on Hiroshima 8 years earlier. Observers were arranged in trenches and bleachers at what the Army considered safe distances, which is a phrase that has aged with all the grace of an open milk carton. Among them were members of Congress, Pentagon brass, a contingent of journalists, and several thousand soldiers from infantry and armor units who had been brought out specifically to watch a tactical nuclear weapon detonate at close range. It was 1953. Risk assessment was a younger discipline. At 8:30 a.m. on May 25th, the lanyard came back. The shell left the barrel, climbed in a clean ballistic arc, and traveled approximately 7 miles downrange. About 19 seconds into its flight, it detonated roughly 500 feet above the desert floor. The flash came first, which is how these things always go, light moving faster than sound and not particularly caring about your eardrums. Then the fireball, then the column of dust climbing up out of the playa, the classic ugly shape of a thing humans were never quite meant to make. Then, a little later, the sound. A pressure wave that rolled over the trenches and the bleachers and made the soldiers who'd been told they were perfectly safe reconsider what perfectly safe meant. The yield came in around 15 kilotons, just where they'd predicted. The shell had been fired from a cannon by a crew on a tripod-mounted gun in the field, and it had worked exactly the way the engineer said it would. It is, to this day, the only nuclear artillery shell ever fired from a cannon by the United States. 20 M65s were in service. 19 of them never got to do this. Only Annie, on this morning, in this empty stretch of Nevada, with no enemy and no front line, only the desert and a few thousand witnesses squinting into the dust. The Army filed the test as a success. The shell worked. The cannon worked. The doctrine was confirmed. And somewhere in the back of a Pentagon office, some colonel could check a box that said, yes, we can in fact lob a 15-kiloton round about 20 miles into the Fulda Gap if the day ever comes. The day, mercifully, never came. The M65 enjoyed a brief and expensive career. By the late 1950s, the same Cold War that had birthed Atomic Annie was already sketching out her replacement. Ballistic missiles were getting smaller, faster, and a great deal less subtle. The Honest John rocket, the Davy Crockett recoilless gun, the Pershing missile, all of them could deliver a tactical nuclear warhead farther than the M65, faster than the M65, and without needing 83 tons of cannon and 2 prime movers to make the trip. The math went the way Pentagon math tends to go. By 1963, the M65 was officially retired. 10 years of service, 20 cannons, 1 nuclear shot fired in earnest, in a desert, at no one in particular. Most of the M65s were quietly scrapped. A handful were preserved as static displays at military bases, where they still squat outside post museums looking less like weapons and more like sculpture from a civilization that briefly believed it could fire its own thunder. The doctrine they were built to support, fire a tactical nuclear shell into an advancing armored column, quietly migrated onto rockets, and then onto warheads small enough to fit on a jeep. The cannon, the heavy steel cannon with the parade-ready silhouette, simply did not survive the transition. It was too slow to reposition, too visible to hide, and too expensive to keep crews trained on once the missile crews were learning a job that did the same thing twice as fast. One of those survivors lives at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, on the grounds of the U.S. Army Field Artillery Museum. Visitors walk past it on their way to the cafeteria. Many of them do not know they are looking at the cannon that, give or take, ended one chapter of American weapons design and opened the door to the missile age. A small placard tells the story. Most folks read it. Some keep walking. Robert Schwartz, the designer, lived a long career in ordnance work and is remembered chiefly by people who collect artillery monographs in 3-ring binders. The Grable test footage was eventually declassified and is, in places, available to anyone with an internet connection, though I should say watching it does not particularly improve one's mood. And the Fulda Gap. It stayed quiet. The Soviet armored divisions never came through it. Atomic Annie was never fired in anger. The most expensive, heaviest, most photogenic gun the U.S. Army ever fielded did her one job, exactly once, and then went home. There's a particular kind of weapon that gets built not because anyone really expects to use it, but because somebody in a meeting needed to be able to say it existed. Atomic Annie was that kind of cannon. She was the answer to a question nobody quite wanted to ask, and the empty desert at Frenchman Flat is about as close to an answer as anybody ever needed to hear. She sits at Fort Sill now, paint chipping, barrel pointed at nothing in particular, which is, all things considered, the best assignment she ever had. If forgotten corners of American military history are your kind of story, the next one's already saddled up. I'll see you down the trail.